Hello students, good morning to all of you. Once again I welcome you on this online teaching platform of Divine Public School, Mohanapur, Gorakhpur. I welcome you all. Dear students, today I am going to teach you a very important lesson from your textbook Vistas, and the name of the lesson is The Enemy, from your subject English and board CBSE. Dear students, as this chapter is too long, for this reason I have divided this chapter in 3 videos. This is the part or video 1 of the chapter The Enemy. Before I come to the explanation of the chapter, I would like to give you a brief description about the life and work of the author who has written this chapter, The Enemy. The name of the author is Pearl S. Buck. Pearl S. Buck, who was born in 1892 and she died in 1973, was an American writer and novelist. She had a Chinese name, Tsai Shenshu, as she spent her childhood in China. Being the daughter of missionaries, she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1938. Pearl S. Buck was born on June 26, 1892 in Hillsborough, which is in West Virginia. In 1930, she published her first novel, East Wind, West Wind. Her next novel, The Good Earth, earned her a Pulitzer Prize in 1932. In 1938, Buck became the first American female Nobel laureate. Her notable works are The Dragon Seed, which was published in 1942, The Water Buffalo Children, published in 1943, and in 1960, The Christmas Ghost was published. These were the few notable works of Pearl S. Buck. Now, dear students, hereby I come to the objectives of the lesson. Why this chapter is very important for you all. First one is the general objective. The general objective of this chapter is to develop the 4 skills of English, that is reading, writing, listening and speaking. The second point is specific objective. Now through this lesson, you will realize the essential worth of human life and universal brotherhood. Dear student, this lesson will help you to think beyond countries and continent and races and wars. Dear student, this chapter will make you understand the significance of professional ethics and social obligation in sensitive times. So, these 3 points are the specific objective of the lesson. Now, before I start explaining the chapter, we should look at the main characters of the story. The main characters. The first one is Dr. Sadao. Dr. Sadao is a dedicated surgeon and doctor, kind and prejudiced against the white man. The next main character is Hannah. Hannah, she is the wife of Dr. Sadao, balanced woman, stands with her husband, responsible, dignified and graceful. The next main character is Tom. He is prisoner of war but of strong willpower. Then comes the general of army, who is selfish and careless. Then comes the Yumi, the servant who looked after Dr. Sadao and Hannah's children, loyal to the country, prejudiced against white man. And at last, domestic servants, loyal to the country and prejudiced against white men. So Dr. Sadao, Hannah, Tom, the general, Yumi, domestic servants. These are the main characters of the story. Now, coming to the introduction of the lesson, it is a thought-provoking story which highlights how a doctor's duty as a trained medical practitioner towards a patient makes him rise above narrow national prejudices. He risked his honor, position, and life, as well as that of his wife and children, by sheltering a runaway prisoner of war of the enemy camp and saving his life. The conflict in the doctor's mind as a private individual and as a citizen with a sense of national loyalty is beautifully portrayed. The narration, The Enemy, written by Pearl S. Buck, is a heart-rending portrayal of the conflict between a man's heart and mind. It tells us about how people can help enemies on human grounds. To hate our enemy is natural and justifiable, especially during wartime. This story beautifully depicts how a human being rises above his prejudices to help a wounded enemy. Now, coming to the explanation of the chapter. The scene of the action is a spot on the Japanese coast. Now, dear student, as you can see the word spot, which is highlighted in yellow color. Likewise, I have highlighted the difficult words used in this paragraph in yellow color. Before we read this chapter or I explain this paragraph for you all, let's have a look on the difficult words. The first one is spot, which means a particular place. Second difficult word is beach, an area of sand. Next comes outlined, which means mark the outer edge. Fourth difficult word is surgery, the treatment of injuries or disorders. Then comes surgeon, a medical practitioner qualified to practice surgery. Then sixth difficult word is scientist, a person who is studying natural or physical sciences. The seventh difficult word is troops, which means soldiers or armed forces. And at last, general. General in army, a title used to denote the rank. So these were the difficult words used in this paragraph with its meaning. Now, first of all, let me read the paragraph for you all. The scene of the action is a spot on the Japanese coast. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was a low, square stone-built house. It was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach outlined with bent pines. Sadao's father had a deep concern for his son's education. So Sadao had been sent to America at 22 to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine there. He returned at 30. He became famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist also. Now, dear student, the writer introduces the main character of the story, Dr. Sadao Hoki. Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the coast of Japan. He had been living there since his childhood. The house had a low height and was made of stone. It was set upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with pine trees that were tilted towards one side. Now, here students, I am going to tell you about Dr. Sadao's childhood. When Dr. Sadao was a child, he would climb up the pine trees. On his visits to the South Seas, he would see men do so in order to get coconuts from the trees. He would accompany his father to the islands of South Seas often. His father would point towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan. Dr. Sadao would question him childishly that where would they reach from those islands. His father would reply that it was not known as it depended on the future. The future had no limits. It depended on mankind how it shaped its future. So, this was the brief introduction of Dr. Sadao's childhood. Sadao retained all the things that his father would tell him as a child. His father never played or joked with him. They shared a mature relation, and his father underwent a lot of hardships to bring him up. Sadao knew that his father was concerned about his education. He was sent to America at the age of 22 to study surgery and medicine. He returned at the age of 30. Before dying, Sadao's father saw Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist. Sadao was on his way to discover a treatment for wounds which would make them absolutely clean. Now see the second paragraph. It was the time of the World War. Japan was at war with America. Dr. Sadao had not been sent abroad with the troops. The old general was under medical treatment and he might need an operation. So, Dr. Sadao was being kept in Japan. Now, dear student, as it was the time of World War, so the two countries, Japan and America, they both were enemy to each other. But here one question arises that Dr. Sadao, who was a surgeon and scientist, was not sent abroad with the troops. The question arises, why? Dr. Sadao was an eminent surgeon and a scientist. He was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. Secondly, the old general was being treated medically for a condition for which he might need an operation. Due to these two reasons, Sadao was being kept in Japan and not sent abroad with the troops. Coming to the next slide. Sadao watched mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore. Then it came creeping up the beach below his house. His wife Hannah came out and put her hands on his arms. It gave him pleasure. Then she laid her cheek against his arm. At this moment, both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He staggered a few steps. Then the curled mist hid him again. Hannah and Sadao leaned over the railing of the veranda. They saw a man crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell down on his face and lay there. They thought that it was perhaps a fisherman who had been washed from his boat. Now, dear students, look at the highlighted words in yellow color, which are the difficult words in this paragraph. The first difficult word is mist, which means foggy. Second difficult word is outlines, which means the outer lines of a figure. Third one is creeping, which means occurring gradually. Next comes staggered, meaning move or walk unsteadily as if about to fall. Then comes curled, which means form or cause to form into a curved. So these were the difficult words used in this paragraph. Now coming to the explanation of the paragraph. The writer describes the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house. As the days were unusually warm and the sea waves were cold, the nights became foggy. Dr. Sadao saw the boundary of a nearby island became invisible gradually as it covered in the mist. Slowly the mist was coming closer to him. Soon there would be mist all around his house. At that time he would go back into the house to his wife Hannah, who was waiting for him along with their two children. Before Sadao could go inside, the door opened and his wife looked out for him. Now dear students, here I am going to describe the appearance of Hannah. She was wearing a dark blue colored gown over her dress. She lovingly crossed her with arm smiled at him, remained silent and stood by him. And she laid her cheek against his arm. Now in this paragraph, dear students, I am going to explain you how Dr. Sadao and Hannah met each other while living and studying in America, because they both met each other in America. Dr. Sadao and Hannah had met in America. Sadao knew that his father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured this before falling in love with Hannah. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have accidentally met her at an American professor's house. He wondered that had he not met her, he would not have got a wife all his life. He thought that the professor and his wife were kind, as they were keen to help foreign students. He was glad that they had accepted this kindness and went to their house, because it was there that he had met Hannah. Sadao would often tell Hannah that it was a mere coincidence that he went to the professor's house that night, as the rooms in his house were small. The food was not good and the professor's wife was very talkative. If he had not gone there that night, he would not have met Hannah. At that time, Hannah was a new student. Sadao had thought that he would love her if at all it would be possible for him. Sadao and Hannah loved each other even after having 2 children. After many years of marriage, they had not married in a haste in America. Rather, they returned to Japan, sought permission from their parents, and then got married in a traditional Japanese ceremony. They had discussed all the details before the wedding. They were happy with each other. Hannah rested her cheek against Sadao's arm with affection. Now look at the second paragraph, student, for the explanation. That moment, they saw a figure appear out of the mist. It appeared black in color due to the mist in the air. The outline of a man's body was visible in the mist. He walked unsteadily with his arms above the head. It was an indication that he was a prisoner. The man walked a few steps and then disappeared in the mist. Upon seeing the figure, Hannah reacted by asking that who was that? She took her arm out of Sadao's arm and both of them bent forward over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look at the man. They saw him again. He was crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell on his face and kept on lying there. Probably he had fainted. As the area had villages full of fishermen, Sadao said that probably it was a fisherman who had been washed off his boat. Now coming to the third slide, continuation of the chapter. When they came towards him, they saw that he was wounded. He lay motionless. They saw his face. Hannah whispered that he was a white man. Sadao began to search for the wound. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. In order to stanch the fearful bleeding, he packed the wound with the sea moss. The man was unconscious. He moaned with the pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Sadao muttered, "What shall we do with this man?" He said that the best thing they could do was to put him back in the sea. Hannah agreed it. Sadao explained that it was a difficult situation. If they sheltered a white man in their house, they would be arrested. If they turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die. They were staring upon the inert figure with a curious repulsion. Now, dear students, look at the difficult words used in this paragraph. First one is wounded. Its meaning is inflicted with a wound. Second difficult word is stanch, to stop the flow of something, especially blood. Unconscious, that means not awake or aware to respond. Moaned means cried with pain. Stupor means a state in which you are unable to think. Then the sixth difficult word is muttered. Its meaning is say something in low voice. Then comes at last repulsion, which means a feeling of very strong dislike. Once again, I repeat the meaning of the difficult words for you all. Wounded means inflicted with a wound. Stanch means to stop the flow of something, especially blood. Unconscious means not awake and aware to respond. Moaned means cried with pain. Stupor means a state in which you are unable to think. Muttered means say something in low voice. Repulsion means a feeling of very strong dislike. Now, coming to the explanation, students. As the Japanese couple saw the man, they ran towards him. Hana followed him. The loose leaves of her hauri flew as she ran. This part of the coast was not inhabited as it had dangerous rocks on it. As the rocks were pointed, the man could be badly injured, although he had managed to come through them. As the Japanese couple saw the man, they realized that he was badly injured. The sand on which he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. Sadao said that man was wounded. He approached the man, who lay motionless with his face buried in the sand. An old cap hung on his head. It was soaked with sea water. His dress was also wet and torn. Sadao turned the man's head. As they saw the face, Hana spoke confidently that he was a white and American. The injured man was an American. As his cap fell off, they saw his wet yellow colored hair, which had not been cut for a long time. He was young. His face had such marks which indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough, unkempt yellow colored beard. As he had fainted, he did not know of the presence of Sadao and Hana. Sadao was reminded the man was wounded, as he had seen blood stains on the sand. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of the wound in the lower part of his back. It was a gunshot. The man had been injured a few days ago. He had not got any medical help to treat the wound, as he had himself used some black colored powdery substance on it. The sharp rocks on the shore had pierced it, and so it was bleeding. So to stop the flow of something, that means especially the blood, he packed the wound with the sea moss. The man cried with the pain, but he didn't awake, or he was not aware to respond. He was not knowing the presence of Sadao and Hana. Now, dear students, look at the second paragraph. Sadao answered to himself and said that the best thing was to put the man back into the sea. Dr. Sadao and Hana, they both had the discussion on this injured man. What shall we do with this man? Sadao answered to himself and said that the best thing was to put the man back into the sea. As the bleeding stopped, he stood up and removed the dust from his hands. Hana supported his opinion but looked intently at the man as he lay still. Sadao said that if they gave him shelter, they would be arrested for sheltering an enemy. If they handed him over to the Japanese army as a prisoner, then he would die in the prison. As he thought that both the options were not favorable, so the best option was to put him back into the sea. Hana added that the kindest act for them was to put him back into the sea. Both of them did not move ahead to do so. Rather, They stared at the motionless figure with dislike. They disliked him because he was an enemy, an American. Now, coming to the next slide. Then they tried to find out what he was. He looked American. The battered cap had faint lettering, US Navy. They concluded that he was a sailor from an American warship. The man was a prisoner of war. He had escaped and was wounded in the back. Hannah asked Sadao if they were able to put him back into the sea. Sadao hesitated. If the man had been whole, he could be turned over to police without difficulty, as he was his enemy. All Americans were his enemy, but since he was wounded, they should not throw him back to sea. Now, dear students, see the difficult words here, highlighted in yellow color. The first one is battered, which means damaged. Second difficult word is American warship, that means the combatant ship used in the war. Hesitated means slow to act or speak. Now see the explanation. I am going to explain this paragraph for you all. Listen it very carefully. Hannah was inquisitive as she asked about the man's identity. Sadao replied that he appeared to be an American. He picked up the torn cap and read the words written on it, which were slightly visible. He said that the man was a sailor from an American warship and read out the words US Navy written on the cap. They concluded that the man had been taken into captivity during the war. Sadao and Hannah discussed that the man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. Now listen to the explanation of paragraph 2 of this slide. They were not able to gather the courage to throw him into the sea. Hannah called upon Sadao with firmness. She asked him if he was ready to put him into the sea. Sadao told her that he was able to do so and asked that did Hannah have the courage for it. Hannah replied in the negative and added that if he could not do it by himself, then she had to help him. Sadao was reluctant in throwing the man into the sea. He reasoned that if the man was well, he would hand him over to the police without any hesitation. He added that he was not concerned about the man and considered him to be an enemy as he was an American. He commented that the injured man was a common man as his face looked as if he was a foolish person. He wanted to say that he was not bothered about the injured man, but his only concern was that he was wounded. Now dear students, here I have given you few questions. You have to write the answer of this question in your classwork copy. Question number 1, who was Dr. Sadao? Where was his house? Question number 2, what will Dr. Sadao and his wife do with the man? Question number 3, both of them saw something black came out of the mist. What did they see and how did they react to it? Question number 4, what dilemma did Sadao face about the young white man? Question number 5, what was the attitude of Sadao and Hannah towards the white man? Question number 6, in which state did Sadao and Hannah find the man? What did they learn about him? So there are 6 questions. You have to write the answer of all these 6 questions in classwork copy and you have to submit it. Thank you students for watching and listening this video.